Hello everyone, this is Chapter 2, Democracy in Action. This has been created for Grade 6 Social Studies students in Alberta. This is a direct reading from the book Voices in Democracy, Action and Participation, written by J. Craig Harding and Alan Sears. This video is for educational purposes only and has been created as a support tool for students and teachers during the COVID pandemic. Imagine if you wanted to join a team and you were told, "No, you can't." Would that seem fair to you? If you didn't agree with the reasons you were being told no, is there some action you could take? On these 2 pages, you will learn about a girl who was in that exact position. When she and her parents were told no, they didn't give up. They believed that what they wanted was fair and just. In 1983, Justine Blainey was 10 years old and a gifted hockey player. To improve her game, she went to hockey school and decided to try out for a boys' team. After winning a place on the Metro Toronto Hockey League team, Justine was shocked to learn that she would be benched forever. No matter how well a girl played, only boys could join the hockey league. Although she was well qualified, Justine would never have a chance to play. Was what happened to Justine fair? Explain. What action do you think Justine could take? What would you do if you were in Justine's position? Justine and her parents decided to fight for justice. They complained to the Ontario Human Rights Commission. But the commission could not help because an Ontario law stated sports teams could discriminate on the basis of gender. That meant they could legally refuse to let girls play on their teams. Justine's family challenged the Ontario law. Her parents hired a lawyer who went to court 5 times to argue that Justine should be able to play on the boys' team. Each time the court ruled against Justine. Eventually, the case reached the Supreme Court of Canada, the highest court in the country. The judges of the Supreme Court said that, according to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, everyone has the right to fair and equal treatment. They ruled that the Ontario law ignored Justine's equality rights under the Charter. Because of the ruling, it is no longer legal to exclude girls from participating on male teams. Today, Dr. Justine Blainey Broker shares a chiropractic practice with her brother and continues to promote equality through public speaking. What are our rights and freedoms? How was Justine's case an example of democracy at work? Democracies protect the rights of all citizens. The most important source of people's rights in Canada is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Charter is a document that protects the essential rights and freedoms of people living in Canada. It begins by naming the freedoms. A freedom is the ability to choose for yourself what to think, say, or do. The Charter protects our freedom to follow any religion we choose, think and believe what we like, say what we think, give our opinions in newspapers and other media, meet peacefully with others. Individual rights. Most rights and freedoms in the Charter protect individuals. These Charter rights and freedoms are known as individual rights. Section 1 of the Charter guarantees our rights and freedoms. It also states that they are subject to reasonable limits. In other words, the government can limit a person's right or freedom, but it must show why the limit is necessary. For example, your freedom to state your opinions and speak out on issues is limited by the rights of others. This is why it is against the law to try to ruin a person's reputation by writing or saying things about the person that you know are not true. Everyone in Canada has certain rights, but only citizens have democratic rights and mobility rights. Democratic rights allow citizens to vote. Mobility rights give citizens the right to travel freely within Canada and to move anywhere in the country to live and work. Citizens can also enter, remain in, or leave Canada whenever they wish. Equality rights. Equality means treating everyone the same. Is an important value to most Canadians. Equality is an example of a right that is protected by the Charter. Equality means that all Canadian laws must treat each individual with dignity and respect. It doesn't matter what the person's race, religion, national or ethnic origin is, their color, gender, age, or physical or mental disability. Everyone is treated equally. When citizens in a democracy believe that they are being denied these rights, they can seek protection. In Justine's case, she and her family went to court. They sought protection of Justine's right to equality through the court system. How had an Ontario law taken away Justine's equality right? The Charter protects individuals' rights to equality, but does that mean that everyone receives the same treatment? Treating people equally means providing each individual or group with respect and equal opportunity. For example, some people or groups have a disadvantage or special disability that others do not have. In this case, dealing with them equally would not be treating them fairly. Treating people or groups with special needs equally means accommodating their disabilities. Under the Charter, a program that tries to help disadvantaged groups is allowed. For example, a company could have a policy that encouraged hiring people who were members of a group that had suffered past injustices. Collective rights. You have looked at rights that the Charter gives to individuals. Some rights, however, are also given to groups. These are called collective rights. Collective rights are based on the idea that a certain group has a claim to a particular right. The Charter gives collective rights to Aboriginal people and to English and French-speaking people. The collective rights of these groups are rooted in the history of Canada. Aboriginal rights. Many Aboriginal people argue that they have certain rights as the original occupants of the land that is now Canada. In 1973, the Supreme Court of Canada agreed. It ruled that Aboriginal people have rights to their traditional territories even where there are no treaties. Exactly what these rights mean is still being worked out by Aboriginal people, the federal and provincial governments, and the courts. In one famous case, Donald Marshall, a member of the Mi'kmaq Nation, was charged with breaking fishing regulations. He was found guilty in Nova Scotia courts, but he appealed his case all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. Marshall argued that treaties from 1760s gave him the right to catch fish for sale and excused him from fisheries regulations. The Supreme Court ruled in Marshall's favor. Many non-Aboriginal fishers were angered by the decision. They argued that Aboriginal fishers should have to follow the same rules as everyone else. Language rights. The Charter identifies French and English as Canada's official languages. Both languages have equal status in the Government of Canada. This means that our representatives in Parliament can speak French or English during discussions and debates. Also, people can communicate with the federal government in English or French. The Charter recognizes the rights of the English and French-speaking communities because of the unique role each played in the founding of Canada. Democracy and participation. Democracy is different from other forms of government in that all citizens can participate in shaping their communities and society. They can participate in making and changing the rules they live by. The more people participate, the more democratic a society becomes. When people become involved in an issue that benefits them personally, Their actions often benefits others as well. Justine Blainey won the right not only to play hockey herself, but for other girls to play as well. Wheelchair ramps and elevators can be used by everyone, not only people who have a disability. When citizens participate to make things better for many people, they are contributing to the common good. What are our democratic rights? Do you think the following situations should be allowed in a democracy? Why or why not? Only some citizens are allowed to vote. Only citizens born in the country are allowed to run for positions in government. An elected government decides that it will stay in power for 20 years without an election. A government is elected, but years may go by without the representatives getting together to make laws. There are 3 sections in the democratic rights part of the Charter that explain the democratic rights of citizens. See what the Charter has to say about the above situation. So let's see if the Charter actually allows some of the situations that we discussed just previously. Democratic rights of citizens. All Canadian citizens have the right to vote for representatives for federal and provincial government. They also have the right to run for office. How often should elections be held? Federal and provincial elections must happen at least every 5 years. The exceptions are in emergency situations such as war, invasion, or rebellion. And how often must the government meet? Federal and provincial governments must meet at least once every 12 months. Imagine if every time a decision was made in Alberta, everyone in the province came together to discuss it. Where would they all meet? How would people take turns talking? Making decisions this way is not practical. In Canada, we choose people who form the government and they make decisions for us. This is called representative democracy. These representatives have a responsibility to listen to the needs of all citizens. We choose our representatives by voting for them. Voting is a basic right in a democracy. How might you participate in a representative democracy? Imagine, for example, that a new school playground is being built. Your principal asks each grade 4, 5, and 6 class to send one student to be on the playground planning committee. One student to be on the playground planning committee. Your class votes for representatives who brings your ideas about the new playground to the committee meeting. This is all a form of representative democracy. In 2001, there was a municipal election in Edmonton. But Aaron Fitzgerald and Christine Jaram Singh could not vote because they were only 16 years old. In Canada, a citizen has to be 18 years old to vote. Aaron and Christine felt the law on voting discriminated against them because of their age. They took their case to court. The judge agreed that 18-year-old voting age did violate equality rights in the Charter. But he concluded that the limitation on this right is reasonable. He said, this limitation is meant to ensure that people who vote are mature enough to make good decisions. On May 20th, 1999, the Supreme Court of Canada made a decision that affected the voting rights of many First Nations people. Before this time, only band members who lived on reserves were allowed to vote in elections for band chief and council. The person who brought this case to the Supreme Court was John Corbier of the Batchewana Nation. Many band members, more than half, do not live on reserves. John Corbier argued it was unfair that these off-reserve band members did not have voting rights. Membership in a band is given to a person at birth, said Corbier, and that membership is secure whether or not the Indian was born on the reserve or ever set foot on the reserve land. Band elections were run according to Section 77(1) of the Indian Act, which stated that only those who were ordinarily resident on the reserves could vote. the judges of the Supreme Court ruled that this section did violate equality rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The judges wrote in their decision that this section made it seem like off-reserve band members were less important than members who lived on the reserve. They decided that off-reserve members were being discriminated against. John Corbier was very happy about the Supreme Court's decision. He believed that his community's government would be improved because of it. Winning the right to vote. Christine and Aaron are not the first people to fight for the right to vote in Canada. For many years, voting in Canada was restricted to certain groups. When people first started voting in Canada, only men from Europe who owned property could vote. For over 100 years, individuals and groups have pressured the government to expand the right to vote to include more citizens. Over time, laws on voting have changed so more citizens can participate and share in decisions that affect them. If you look at this timeline, in 1874, the first secret ballot in Canada. 1918, most women over 21 were given the right to vote. 1948, Asian Canadians were given the right to vote. 1950, Inuit were given the vote in federal elections. In 1960, First Nations people living on reserves were given the vote. 1970, voting age was lowered from 21 to 18. And finally, in 2002, people serving in federal prisons were also given the right to vote. Suffrage means the right to vote. Suffragettes were women who fought for women's right to vote. Early in Canada's history, many people believed that only men should participate in politics. However, by the late 1800s, women began to demand the right to participate in government. It wasn't easy for these women to get together to discuss important issues. Often, their husbands or fathers did not allow them to attend meetings. Some women decided to organize what they called pink teas. Women were invited for tea at places with frilly pink decorations. If any men came, the women changed the topics. If only women were there, then their discussion usually turned to women's suffrage, which is women's right to vote. By 1918, some women in Canada had been given the right to vote in federal and provincial elections. Because of their religion, background, or country of origin, other women had to wait for almost another 50 years. Did you know that October is Women's History Month? Each year, Status of Women Canada, which is an agency of the federal government, prepares materials that tell about women's history and their contributions to Canadian society. Women's position in our society has changed dramatically since the days of the suffragettes. Women's rights. When the Charter was being negotiated in 1981, 1,300 women went to Ottawa to demonstrate in favor of having sexual equality guarantees in the Charter. The result was Section 28 of the Charter, which guarantees that rights and freedoms are guaranteed equally to men and women. Women in government. In 1929, 5 suffragettes won the right for Canadian women to be considered persons and be appointed to the Senate. Women's education. In the early 1900s, women were discouraged and even barred from studying in fields like business, medicine, engineering, and law. By 1998, over 55% of graduates at the university level were women. Today, there are more women than men in law schools, and society encourages women to enter all fields of study. Have you ever played a game in which one player or one team didn't follow the rules? How did that change the game? How did you feel about playing the game that way? About 800 years ago in England, the king did exactly that. King John made all the rules for the people of his country, but he didn't have to follow any of them. He taxed, arrested, and punished people for his own reasons. So, in the year 1215, a group of nobles rebelled and forced King John to sign a document called the Magna Carta. In return, the nobles promised to be loyal to the king. The Magna Carta introduced the idea of the rule of law. This means that everyone, no matter how important she or he is, has to obey the law. The Magna Carta was really the first charter of rights. The Magna Carta protected the rights of individuals in England long ago. One important idea from the Magna Carta is part of our charter today. It protects the rights of a person who is arrested. The person must be told why he or she has been arrested and must be brought in front of a court and charged with a crime within a reasonable amount of time. Why do you think this rule is necessary in today's society? Making the rules. To carry out the rule of law, certain steps have to be followed that allow people to participate fairly. Under the rule of law, citizens have a say in making and changing the law. In a democracy, they make the laws either directly or through the representatives they elect, which are your politicians. If the representatives pass laws that people think are unfair, they may not be reelected. So if your politician passes a law that you don't like, in the next election, most likely you won't vote for them. People are informed about the law. In democracies, governments find ways to publish or announce laws, so everyone has a fair chance of knowing what they are. People are treated equally under the law, regardless of their race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, gender, age, or mental or physical disabilities. People participate in applying the law. In many democracies, people accused of a crime must be judged by ordinary citizens like themselves. This group of citizens is called a jury. Members of the jury listen to arguments from both sides during the trial. Then, based on what they have heard, they decide on a person's guilt or innocence. In Canada, the identity of jury members is protected, and juries cannot be photographed in the courtroom. The idea of justice is often represented by the statue of a woman with a blindfold and scales. Why do you think the statue is blindfolded? What do you think she is weighing with the scales? How can people make a difference? Being a citizen involves rights and responsibilities. Those responsibilities can go beyond casting your ballot or voting or obeying the laws. Sometimes they involve making our communities and the world a better place. Ryan from Ontario decided to make a difference when he was only 6 years old. His teacher told the class about people in Africa having to walk many kilometers every day for fresh water. Ryan decided to raise money to help pay for one well. Soon he had convinced his parents, brother, and many friends to help. Before long, they were raising thousands of dollars for water projects. Volunteering to help people. When Amy Brandon was in high school, she noticed many special education students ate lunch by themselves. Then Amy read about a program called Lunch Buddies. Students in this program volunteered to meet and talk with special education students during lunch. Amy decided to volunteer too. She liked the program so much, she convinced many of her friends to join. Eventually, Amy was in charge of the program. The number of volunteers grew from 10 to 40, and the special education students began feeling much more a part of their school community. Giving people a voice. Alanis is a member of the Abenaki Nation. She grew up in Quebec. When she was a young girl, she listened to the history of her people from the elders. As Alanis grew older, she saw that these stories were not taught in school. Alanis decided the best way to tell these stories to young children was by making films that everyone could see. The first film she made was Christmas at Moose Factory. It tells the story of young Cree children growing up in the community in James Bay and some of the difficulties they had. Alanis had since made more than 20 films about the history of First Nations people. These films have been seen by students across Canada. Alanis has received many awards for her work. She says, "The reason I make films is to give voice to our people, a place to express themselves in dignity, to expose injustices, which are wrongs, and tell our history." Detecting bias. Imagine you are reading an article or listening to a speech. Your first job is to understand what exactly the writer or speaker is trying to say. Then you need to decide whether he or she has a particular point of view or bias toward the subject. Compare these two sentences. Which writer do you think is giving a factual report of the event? Which writer do you think has a bias? Which words in the sentence show the bias? So this is the first sentence. The representative of the Citizen Action Committee complained that his rights were not being respected. Now this is the second sentence. One protester from a small group was constantly whining about the way he was being treated. Which sentence had the bias? It was the second one. Everyone has biases. You may have a bias towards a sports team in your town or city. You may think it is the best team even though it doesn't win in most games. Your society or culture may bias you in favor of certain attitudes or beliefs. When you do research, read newspapers, or watch the news on television, you need to be aware of the biases these sources may have. For example, a source may be in favor of one political party over another, one viewpoint over another, or even one part of the country over another. Biased sources might present only one side of the issue, contain emotional language or exaggeration, or label people or groups. How can you figure out if a source of information is biased? Here are some tips. You have to ask yourself, what is the subject of this article? What is the source of this article? Does this source represent a viewpoint? If so, what is their viewpoint? How does the language in the article support that viewpoint? Who is quoted in the article? Do the quotes support the viewpoint? Does any of the information in this source need to be checked for accuracy?